So in this video, we're going to look at some examples that reflect a familiar pattern that often surfaces on these logically completing the text questions. So what is this pattern? I'll just sketch it out here to the right. So somewhere near the beginning of the passage, it may be in the first sentence, it may be in the second one, they're going to give you some kind of clue as to the main issue at hand, what I would call the main issue. In this case, it's going to be the identity of the feline figure depicted in these murals. And so as it says, some researchers have interpreted the feline as the goddess Bastet, often depicted as a cat in Egyptian art. Okay, so that's going to be part one, or point one, that some scholars, some researchers, some scientists, etc. say X, where again, in this case, X is the claim that the feline is the goddess Bastet. Okay, the next thing that tends to come up is some kind of contrary evidence, so evidence that challenges this claim. And so in this case, we're going to see that, as it says, this Egyptologist proposes that cats may have also been commonly associated with scribes due to their role in controlling pests like mice. Okay, so our second point is going to be basically that evidence challenges this idea. It may be that evidence directly challenges it. It may be that there's a lack of evidence to support it. It may be that for some particular, subset of people or situations, this idea may not hold. But in any event, we're going to get something that sort of casts doubt on the original claim. And so I'll just underline that portion. And then the conclusion will more or less say that therefore, so TFF for therefore, X may not be correct. So it's not that it's guaranteed to be wrong, but it may not be correct. And so that's what we're going to find here. The presence of a cat near the scribe figure, therefore, is not conclusive evidence that the feline figure represents Bastet. And I'm going to write up here at the top that X equals the main issue. The main issue being whether or not X is really true. So I should maybe say the truth of X is the main issue. That's the issue at hand. And so in another video, I'll talk about how even when you don't have this pattern, identifying the main issue can be really, really important, or at least really, really helpful in terms of getting the right answer. But if we look at the other answer choices here, so Bastet was always depicted alongside scribes. It certainly doesn't do that, but when you have those extreme words, that's usually a red flag on these logically completing questions. Eliminates the possibility that the feline figure is Bastet. Nope, that's also extreme. And again, it doesn't eliminate the possibility. It just means that it may not necessarily be Bastet. And then, must be a depiction of a royal figure? No. So all three of these have extreme words. You're not necessarily going to see that on a whole lot of questions, but definitely something to pay attention to. And so given that this is a pattern, I think it would help to see a couple more examples, and I'll try to move through them a little bit more quickly. And so this one here, a little more science-y, it says that the spread of flowering plants, or angiosperms, during the Cretaceous period has been attributed by some paleobotanists to an increase in atmospheric oxygen levels, which may have accelerated plant metabolism and reproduction. Okay, so some paleontologists, and let's get the order of ideas right here. So they attribute the spread of flowering plants to this rise. And so I'm going to say here, some say that the rise in O2 levels led to the spread of angiosperms. Can I fit that in there? I think I can, yes. Okay, so some say that. However, and there comes our contrast, so however, detailed geochemical records show no evidence of a significant rise in atmospheric oxygen coinciding with key phases of angiosperm diversification. So I'm just going to say, but evidence challenges this, or in this case, there is a lack of evidence to support it. So we could conclude that, therefore, the spread of angiosperms was not a result of a rise in oxygen levels. So rise in O2 may not have caused that, caused the spread of angiosperms. And here I didn't color code the passage, but I think you can sort of follow along. And so that's our red part. That's our yellow part. And then our conclusion is going to be in one of the answer choices. So A, fluctuations in atmospheric oxygen affected different angiosperms differently. And there's nothing in here about different species of angiosperms. It's just in general. So that's making a distinction that we just don't have in the passage. B, the evolution of flowering plants may not have depended on increased atmospheric oxygen, and that's exactly what we have here. So that's going to be the correct one. But looking at the others, atmospheric oxygen levels fluctuated in ways unrelated to plant evolution. Well, there's nothing here that really says anything at all about fluctuations. Fluctuations, up and down movements. And so not going to be C. And then D, flowering plants would not have diversified as rapidly if atmospheric oxygen had been even a little lower. And no. There's a missing word here, my apologies. Atmospheric oxygen levels had been even a little lower than they were, or we could just take those words off. Okay, and so no. And so our correct answer, again, in line with this 1, 2, 3 pattern. And so one more, this one with an additional twist that you'll see as we go. So some philosophers, and I'll get back to the underlining here, some philosophers hold that genuine happiness depends solely on arranging one's external circumstances advantageously, irrespective of how one responds internally to life's events. So some, in this case, philosophers, and I'm just going to write X because that's so long, so lengthy, but X is really going to be this whole portion after that. So I could highlight this. Is it going to get messy if I do this? Maybe not too much, but X is this portion here extending to the end of the sentence. Now continuing here, so this philosopher's interpretation of Stoic texts, however, presents a starkly different perspective. According to this philosopher, the Stoics viewed happiness not as a product of favorable external conditions, but as something rooted in one's internal judgments and attitude. So here I'm going to say, but evidence challenges this not in general or, universally, but at least it challenges this, for or with regard to the Stoics. I'll change that to regarding, like in an email, regarding the Stoics. Okay. And here I'm not going to underline it because it's so lengthy. That whole portion there is our but portion. Okay. And then our conclusion, if the Stoic position described by this philosopher accurately reflects the Stoics' thought, then that means that, therefore, the Stoics would have disagreed with X, or X would not be true or valid or correct to the Stoics. Okay, so X again, they would have disagreed with the idea that genuine happiness depends on external circumstances as opposed to internal response to that. And so I'll zoom out so we can fit this in here. So the Stoics believe that only a combination of favorable external conditions, no, that would be probably the opposite of what they believe. B, they considered external pleasures to be superior to internal virtues in achieving happiness. I don't think A and B could both be opposite, but they're both counter to what they would believe. C, the Stoics would have argued that individuals must secure wealth and status. And so no, whenever it brings in some kind of factor or variable that's just not mentioned at all, we don't want to pick that. And so D, they would have rejected the notion that happiness can be secured without cultivating the right internal state of mind. And so what we see here is essentially X, the original claim. Happiness can be secured without cultivating the right internal state of mind. Happiness depends solely on arranging one's external circumstances, irrespective of how one responds internally to life's events. And so even though this is not an official question, it reflects something that is going to be, a tendency that you'll find on official questions, and that is a correct answer on one of these questions is going to paraphrase. Yes, the word internal and internally, they both appear, but as much as possible, it's going to paraphrase and use synonyms as opposed to lifting things straight out of the passage. But again, I want to emphasize, first of all, that this is a really common pattern that I feel like, again, it might appear on as many as a third of the questions. Maybe that's a slight overestimate, but on the other hand, if it appears on 1/3, it doesn't appear on 2/3. So you don't want to try to fit every single question into this framework, but if you can recognize instances of it, it will help you. And then even if you don't have this pattern, there's often going to be a main issue that's at stake, and focusing on that will help you quite a bit on these questions. And I'll elaborate on that idea of the main issue in a separate video, looking at some questions that, where that can help you even when you don't necessarily have this 1, 2, 3 pattern.